So before you tonight, we're hearing the request of Mr. Phil Rangans for a comprehensive plan land use amendment rezone request, as well as a preliminary plat for Harvest Hills addition to the city of Moscow. And before I begin, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about where we've come up to this point. We've had about a 10-year history with this property. I'm not showing the property that's at the request tonight is a 7.45 acre piece, ends about this line right there. The whole piece is about 25 acres in size, and like I had mentioned before, have about a 10-year history with this piece. You'll hear Jansen Street connection throughout the presentation, and I just wanted to point that out on the map in this location right here. So you had the Damon addition, you had Mosier Estates addition, which were previously developed to the north, which didn't require that street to be developed, but there is platted right-of-way there. So just orient yourself with the property. Mountain View Road is to the west there, running north-south, and we've got the Rolling Hills additions to the south. So starting back in 2005, this property, which has historically been utilized for agricultural purposes, was annexed and rezoned from agricultural forestry to our moderate density residential, which is our R2 designation. Also about that same time, concurrently, we had preliminary plat for Windfall Hills subdivision, which existed 77 single-family residential lots, which averaged about 9,700 square feet in size. That equates to about 4.5 dwelling units per acre of net density. And you have the roadway alignments virtually the same as the subsequent Harvest Hills proposals that I'll go over. And that was approved August 1st, 2005. And so at the time, that's what the Windfall Hills preliminary plat looked like. So you've got 3rd Street, which extended to the east, ended up tying back into Rolling Hills 8th edition. And you also had, this was the Jansen Street connection right here heading to the north, and you also had a circular drive here at the end to the east, which ended up connecting to a park property. So we have a 5-acre Mosier Park directly to the east of the plat. Then in 2006, there were some topographical challenges with that plat, and so the applicant submitted a PUD proposal, which coincided with the preliminary plat. And so as part of that, there were sample home elevations, and out of that we've got a reduced front yard setback. There was properties to the south that were platted. It was going to become a challenge with the hillside there, and so that allowed the front yard setback to be reduced from 25 feet to 10 at the time. The developer proposed to provide additional landscaping and public amenities as part of this PUD proposal, and that was approved in July of 2006. So then that brought us to 2008. Everything is for the most part approved. The developer, Windfall Hills, ended up approaching the city. At the time, there was a Verizon pedestal that needed to be removed as part of the subdivision development. About the same time, the city was contemplating a road improvement project for North Mountain View, which would include the frontage of the Windfall Hills subdivision. And the city had a desire to expand that section of Jansen Street to the north of the subdivision plat to the intersection with Damon. And that brought us to a memorandum of understanding, a 2008 version, where the city and the developer reached an agreement through the MOUs approved by City Council in 2008. And the gist of that memorandum of understanding was that the city would contribute up to $50,000 towards the relocation of the Verizon pedestal and be responsible for underground utilities on the Jansen Street extension. All the other development would be borne on the developer. The developer is responsible for public improvements on North Mountain View, which included the bicycle and pedestrian path on the east side and the above-ground improvements on Jansen Street extension. So then brought us to July 21st, 2008. The final plat and development agreement were approved by council. There ended up being some certain timeline of events, conditions within that 2008 memorandum of understanding that were not satisfied, and so the city and the developer entered into a memorandum of understanding for the second time. This one was the 2009, which replaced the 2008 version. And this made the city responsible for improvements to Mountain View, which included paving, curb gutter, and the drainage system. The developer's responsibility under this 2009 MOU was for the total cost of Jansen Street extension, which included underground utilities in Phase 1 of the subdivision. They were required to dedicate street right-of-way in those 25 and 35-foot wide easements that you currently see on the east side of Mountain View with the 10-foot wide path. And the final plat was recorded by June 3rd, 2009. So up to this point, the city has since constructed those improvements to Mountain View. The only item that the developer satisfied was the completion of the street and the 25 and 35-foot easement dedications on the east side of Mountain View. And subsequently, the developer never filed the Windfall Hills final plat or paid for the Jansen Street extension construction. And so that final plat ended up expiring, and per our city code requires you to start from the beginning of the subdivision plat process. So brought us to 2013. We have another owner of the property bringing forward the Harvest Hills addition, which was similar to the previous Windfall Hills alignment and lot size, width. It was very similar to that. You had 75 lots, which ranged in size from a little over 7,000 square feet to about 19,500 square feet in size. After the applicant had gone through the preliminary plat stage, recognized that the project was not financially feasible at that point, it ended up not proceeding to the final plat stage of the project. And this was what they had brought forward with the preliminary plat for Harvest Hills. So as you can see, it's almost identical to that earlier 2005-2006 Windfall Hills proposal. So that brings us to about the 7.5 acre property before you tonight. Once again, it's on North Mountain View to the east side. We have the current terminus of East 3rd Street. You can see that alignment there. Rolling Hills additions to the south. We have the Damon addition directly to the north. You also have Paradise Creek, which ends up going along the northwestern corner of the subject property. So there's really three components before you tonight. We have a comprehensive plan land use amendment, we have a rezone request, and we have a preliminary plat. Preliminary plat has 22 proposed twin home lots and one neighborhood business lot of about 2.2 acres in size. So looking at the topography on the property, those lines you see represent 2-foot elevation change, so they're contour lines. So you see it pretty dramatic slope on the southeast corner. This is sloping in the northwesterly direction. This is just a picture looking northeast from Mountain View. So this is Paradise Creek. You can see going under the roadway and a culvert. You can see quite a bit of vegetation there, existing mature vegetation at the rear of the properties that are right along Damon Street there. This would be looking eastward from the current terminus of 3rd Street. You can see the property slopes up as you head to the east and to the southeast. There's about 20 feet of elevation change from ground level here to the top of the properties. These are properties that are on Crestview Drive. And those are you're looking at the backs of those properties. We've got quite a bit of existing vegetation here to the south side of the subject property. You also have a stormwater detention pond that we'll cover a little bit later in this vicinity over here that was put in as part of the Rolling Hills the Rolling Hills development to the south. So looking at the current land use designation designated by the comprehensive plan, currently neighborhood conservation. And really at the time we were revising our comprehensive plan in 2008 and 2009, it was designated as neighborhood conservation because we had an approved plat on file with the department. And so generally that's reserved for subdivisions that have already been platted, and that's why the subject property is neighborhood conservation currently. The applicant's proposal before you tonight is to revise that or amend that designation to auto urban residential, and that's the yellow you see on your screen there, and suburban commercial, and that's the pink color. So looking at the area, almost completely surrounded by neighborhood conservation because you have those developed neighborhoods. Down on the corner, Picard Orthodontics at the intersection of 6th and Mountain View. That would be designated as suburban commercial currently. So what suburban commercial tells us within the comprehensive plan, we have those 2.2 acres proposed to be amended. It's intended to provide neighborhood commercial services which are compatible with surrounding residential areas. Usually intended to be located at intersections of collectors and arterials. You have Mountain View Road, which is currently an arterial, and you have the 3rd Street extension, which is a proposed collector. And so it meets that criteria. It directs us to more appropriately zone those areas that are designated as suburban commercial to neighborhood business. The 5.25 acres is proposed auto-urban residential. That's intended to be low to moderate density residential uses, and generally includes a mixture of, you have some single-family townhomes and limited scale multifamily is what the comp plan calls out. So appropriate zoning, it would direct us to your R1, R2, which are single-family zones, and R3, which would be ultimately be the proposal tonight. And that brings us to the zoning map of the area. Currently zoned R2, which is moderate density residential. You can see almost completely surrounding the areas are properties that are also zoned R2 down towards the intersection of 6th Street and Mountain View. You have neighborhood business, which is Picard Orthodontics building. And you also have some R3 along the 6th Street corridor there. The proposal would have that 2.2 acres of neighborhood business. You can see in the darker blue and the lighter shade, you have the medium density residential R3 designation. So what the zoning code tells us about the R2 zone, I'm not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about neighborhood business. So it's 2.2 acres. What neighborhood business says is lowest intensity commercial, intended to serve adjacent neighborhoods. It's easily accessible by multimodal transportation, so intersection of collector or arterial would be appropriate. And so that would allow residential uses, personal services, restaurants, professional offices, daycare facilities, churches, and community neighborhood centers, which would be your typical allowed uses within that zone. Looking at the R3 designation, permits different housing types than your R1 and R2. So R1, R2 is almost strictly single family. This would allow single family as well as two family, and then twin homes and townhouses within that zone. It's also intended to be in areas where public systems and neighborhoods can accommodate a greater intensity of land uses. So typically in closer proximity to your arterials or your collectors in town. So that brings us to the preliminary plat for Harvest Hills. Right now, 7.45 acres proposed to be 22 twin home residential lots, which range from a little over 4,000 square feet to a little under 6,500 square feet in size. Just to note, the minimum lot size for the R3 zone is going to be 3,250 square feet. So those lots exceed that by a little bit there. We've got the neighborhood business lot, 2.2 acres. You also have 3rd Street, which I had mentioned before, as a collector. Currently intended to be 34 feet wide in the street section in our current street standards. It's intended to have bike lanes on both sides of the street and no on-street parking with our current standard.